Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Industry. What industry, you say? The Industry, the video series where we discuss the job market, give career guidance, market intel, and everything in between. My name is Zach Plotkin, joined by my co-host Sanjeev Menon from Madison-Davis, and today we are going to be speaking with someone who needs no introduction, but we will still give one, Carole House. Welcome, Carole.
Thanks so much. I'm thrilled to be here with you guys. Great to see you again.
Carole, yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And if you don't know who Carole House is, well, I'm going to give a quick introduction, which might not be so quick because her resume and CV it's expansive and it's a lot. But you started off in the military, right? And then you moved into the federal government from in a regulatory standpoint at FinCEN in a cybersecurity seat. Moved to DHS, then OMB, back to FinCEN and Treasury. Then you're on the National Security Council. And guys, I'm cheating here a little bit. I'm looking at her LinkedIn page, but you'll forgive me for that. You had a stint at DFS as virtual currency advisor. And then, not to cap it off, but you were chair of the Tech Advisory Committee at the CFTC. And you're also a distinguished senior fellow at ACAMS. And we're actually recording this before the ACAMS assembly in Hollywood. But did I sum that up well enough? Do you want to dive in a little deeper into your background?
Yeah, I will. Because it also tells sort of a funny story. Because if you had told me when I was sitting in Afghanistan talking to my soldiers about this funny money called Bitcoin that they were all buying and encouraging me to buy. And I was like, why would you want to, buy something that isn't backed by the full faith of the US government? They didn't listen to me and they're all the better for it. I never would have believed you that if you had told me that I was going to regulate Bitcoin one day. So my career, like you mentioned, a weird patchwork quilt of different national security issues. I was a CBRN, chem bio rad nuclear defense officer, and then also an intelligence collection manager. So that meant that all the assets that watch and listen to people, it was my job to make sure that they were pointed in the right direction to be useful to our operators. And that mindset, I think, actually shaped a lot of my work at FinCEN, the financial intelligence unit, later. So my first stint out of uniform was actually at OMB. So they were standing up a cyber and national security unit. I wasn't hard cyber at the time, but they needed a NatSec person. They brought me aboard. So I oversaw agencies' cybersecurity programs, oversaw a lot of the cybersecurity capabilities that DHS and CISA was standing up. I spent some time on the Hill, actually, at Senate Homeland. And so I was there when we were actually writing the legislation to create CISA, the cyber agency, and doing a lot of work on Huawei and Kaspersky. This was the OG supply chain days. Went to FinCEN to go hunt down cyber criminals. When you do that, you inherently get into crypto. Then I did 2 stints at the National Security Council, including architecting the executive order on digital assets and a cyber EO with some quantum and AI stuff at the end of the admin. And then, like you mentioned, I've served on advisory boards for a few different regulators, including the CFTC, NYDFS, Idaho, and then now I'm on the California Innovation Council also. So doing a lot of advisory work right now, portfolio life, looking for projects that want to get security and strategic technologies right.
I appreciate that. I have a million questions, but I'm going to start with I'm going to stick to the agenda and start with the most basic one because I'm really interested in this one. Why did you go into the military in the first place?
Oh, I was an Army brat. So I grew up in Army family life and just seeing the close-knit community, service and commitment to people and community. I had the most amazing examples in my parents and seeing that. I will admit that I didn't think I was going to go into the Army. I kind of assumed I was going to do NASA or the NSA. I was a big science and math nerd, president of the math club and all that nerd stuff, Science Olympiad, everything. I'm sure that some people listening were a part of these things. But I don't know. I just decided senior year of high school that if I could serve, then I would. And so when I went to UGA, University of Georgia was my undergrad, they had a great ROTC program. And I just decided that I wanted to contribute there for national security. And so then I pivoted out of the hard sciences into international relations, because if I was going to fight in a war, I wanted to make sure that I was equipped to understand more about what got us there in the first place. So a whole different stint, and then went off into the Army and had a lot of interesting stories. God has a sense of humor. anymore. I did not want the chemical branch detail. I wanted to be an intelligence officer, but in the end, it was a huge blessing. I like when you're chemical in the Army, you work in operations. So I was in basically an infantry brigade, a Stryker brigade combat team with a lot of infantry guys. We did have an armor squadron as well and a field artillery battalion, basically just a lot of like combat arms stuff. So I got amazing experience around some fantastic officers and NCOs that helped shape me a lot, and it changed my life.
Because there's so many like different intricate jobs in the Army and the military in general that I don't know about, that I learn every day, especially on the industry, because we speak to a lot of folks that, made the transition from the public side to the private side, and usually they're in the military or, they're LEOs. You said you actually wanted to get into military intelligence in particular. Did you feel like that was just like the with your science and math background, that was a natural place for you?
Yeah, I think so. Honestly, there's lots of different kinds of intelligence. Like you can do human intelligence and human imagery. Everybody likes a picture. But I did always feel really close to the SIGINT guys, the signals collection folks. They were my kinds of nerds, like for the most part. It was my sort of community. I was raised on anything with the word star in it. Trek, Gate, Wars, battle, like all of it. So yeah, like I just enjoyed that. And I loved the idea of intelligence because you get to know all the stuff, right? Like you are watching the enemy. You are supposed to have the most exquisite understanding and rendering of the bad guy picture of red. And also when you war game, you get to play red, which is way more fun because blue has way more rules than red does. So I had a lot of fun there. But in the end, I did actually end up going more of the operations and then now, of course, the policy lane, because I think I got spoiled going operations first. Once you get to make the call about what you do about it, even if all the intel guys know everything, and it's a wonderful experience there, it is, but the whole point of you're supposed to keep policy and intelligence independent, so that they can function separately and not influenced by others not influenced by politics, not influenced by other objectives. Once you get experience making the call, like I fell in love with ops. But I thought at the time that I was going to be in love with intelligence, and it was still really fun. But in the end, I just realized, okay, like that's why I didn't go into the IC. I always thought I would. I thought I would stay like hard IC for the rest of my life, but just decided that wasn't going to be my future.
Well, when you're in the military and you decide or the area that you want to go to, how do you go about going into that space? Like, are you networking internally within the military? Are there specific people you need to push?
Great question. So most of it, it's a very structured meritocracy. I'm not saying that there isn't an aspect of like politic and interpersonal relations that you build, but especially when you first go in, I was a cadet in ROTC at UGA, and so basically there's an order of merit list. There's a ranking structure about like from 1 to the last cadet in the country, and then you get to pick your branches. The Army has a system where they sort of break it up because let's just say that everybody wants to be infantry and intelligence, you can't just have all of your best cadets coming from there. So they have different ways that they use to try to even it out. And they do certain proportions of every like third of the OML. And I don't know if it's changed since my days, goes into different branches. But basically, because I was in the top of the OML, in the top quarter, I got my choice of intelligence. But then they did this like random number selection. Basically, they got me a branch detail to chemical, which I was very angry about at the time because no one likes gas masks. Like, especially at the time, like chemical wasn't a big issue in Afghanistan and in GWAT, our war at the time. But in the end, it was a huge blessing. So even though I was angry, I was really angry about that assignment. That was one of my great mistakes or lessons that I think I've learned in my career, is that things that I really, really wanted and that didn't quite turn out the way that I wanted them to ended up being huge blessings in disguise that I didn't get. Anyway, so basically it's a lot of performance that's supposed to be the way that you get selected for promotion, for your branches, for joint duty assignments. I didn't stick around longer than 4.5 years, so I would have had the opportunity to consider like going into a different branch or getting other assignments later, but I just decided to get out because I knew I could have a more strategic impact out of uniform than I was having in, but it was a life-changing experience. Still glad I served.
That's a good segue. And first, we want to say thank you for your service, Carole.
No, thank you.
So, I mean, you actually beat me to the punch. That move, that transition from the military, it's staying with the government, but to FinCEN, how did that happen? I don't feel like that's a natural transition.
Right. So I got When I went to grad school in Georgetown, I applied for and got the Presidential Management Fellowship. This was a Pathways program that was disbanded last year, but it was a wonderful way for grad students to be able to come into and get entry into the U.S. government. It's like OPM's way of trying to identify future SESs to come in, like really high caliber candidates to come into civilian service. So I got that. So my first tour at the White House was at OMB. I was a fellow at OMB, and then during one of my PMF leadership development programs is when I met someone at FinCEN, another PMF at FinCEN. And he told me about this bureau that hunts down money launderers and terrorist financiers. And I'm like, that's cool. You guys have a cyber section? And they said, yeah, want to come? And I was like, yes, I do. So part of PMF is you get to go on these developmental assignments and these rotations. So I went there for 6 months and had the most amazing time. And I decided to change my whole career and life. I loved OMB. OMB is a great place to work. You run the president's budget, you oversee agencies, and working at the White House is so cool. I didn't know I would get to work there 2 more times. I've been so blessed, but going to FinCEN was it was clearly the future. Crypto was clearly going to be a game-changing technology in finance for good and for bad right now. And so I just realized I wanted to go work with some of the most creative, brilliant minds I ever had. So I went to FinCEN.
And how old was Bitcoin when you went to FinCEN? You were
2017.
Okay. So yeah, so it was well established. It was past Mount Gox. It was Coinbase was around. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was cutting my teeth on learning from a lot of the investigations that FinCEN had done after some of those hacks and other exploits and stuff. But yeah, it was definitely well established. I was no visionary. I was not one of the OGs in the space that was seeing it. So I give full credit to the people at FinCEN that saw crypto for what it was and pushed our rulemakings in 2011 to make sure that we covered cryptocurrency and regulations. Those were the people that I was so inspired by and wanted to go work with. But that was way before I got there. They were way smarter and more visionary than me.
I'm rereading Tracers in the Dark, so I'm I'm deep into the alphabet. You mentioned cyber when you made the transition, or you asked your FinCEN colleague if there was a cybersecurity department at FinCEN. You knew that you wanted to get in or stay in cyber at that point. That was.
Yeah, I knew that I wanted to stay in tech or around tech. Basically, cyber. I've learned a lot that I've really enjoyed assignments where sometimes I like to double click and go deeper, and other times I want to branch out and go wider. And so, in this case, I had gotten a really interesting perspective about cybersecurity on the Hill, writing legislation and doing oversight, working at OMB and overseeing civilian agencies. But I really hadn't seen bad guy cyber. I wanted to understand the guys and the criminal networks that were clearly growing, and the world is not getting less digitized, right? The issue of cybercrime is not getting less important. So I knew that I wanted to understand more about the transnational organized crime apparatus that was sort of backing this up. And everyone believes in money. And so understanding the econ statecraft side of things, that's really why I wanted to go to Treasury and go to FinCEN, was I wanted to get exposed to and bridge out and expand my own understandings there. So I really wanted to do that more horizontal development in that particular assignment. So I knew that I wanted to bring expertise of stuff that I knew very well, which was cyber and tech savvy, as well as an understanding of intelligence and strategy and leadership that I got from the Army, but bring that into this economic statecraft, illicit finance world. And the people there completely changed my life. And it really just led me straight to the NSC at the turn of the Biden administration.
Yeah, it seems like it was a really it was an inflection point in your career. It sounds like you really, really, really enjoyed it. Can you describe your FinCEN experience and how you got the chair seat at the CFTC?
Absolutely. So of course, FinCEN, going over there to hunt down cyber criminals, and when you get into hunting down cyber criminals, you get into crypto, right? Especially at a place like FinCEN, it's the anti-money laundering regulator. Crypto is a cyber criminal's favorite way to purchase their exploit kits, launder their proceeds, ask for extortion payments, ransomware payments. Crypto plays, that is not crypto, the technology's fault. This is the state of the industry. It is not inevitable. But the current state of the sector has enabled the rise of really sophisticated ransomware as a service economies and other kinds of digital crime economies in a really unique way. So ultimately, when I was getting exposure to understanding more about money, as well as just more broadly, like payment system, financial sector. And then I was the FinCEN lead delegate to the FATF, which is the UN for anti-money laundering, basically is the best way to think about it. We were negotiating the first ever international standards for cryptocurrency. So I was getting exposure to like international frameworks, the way that like understanding that like compliance might not sound like everyone's favorite word, but we're literally trying to fight terrorist networks and trying to prevent the next 9/11 from happening, but also trying to create the infrastructure to help get money back that's been defrauded from your grandmother, right? Like AML has a huge overlap with things like civil litigation, as well as with consumer protection, counter fraud, and also stopping big bads like human traffickers and cartels, and cyber criminals. So in all of that, getting exposure to all of those things, it meant that also at the turn of the Biden administration was really ransomware, which had been a priority for a while at FinCEN, really started to rise as a huge issue and starting to recognize that it's not just a law enforcement issue. So this has been a problem that we've had where a lot of cyber crime is viewed as cyber crime. It had at the time not been seen as a national security threat, especially if it wasn't being conducted directly by state actors. Basically, if it like there's a lot of non-state actors in crime groups, even if they're backed or essentially proxies for some of our adversarial nations. Like if it wasn't done by an APT, like by an advanced persistent threat, then like parts of the national security apparatus was like, oh, that's just law enforcement only, as a priority. And like, well, and even though, and I care about things like fraud, like business email compromise and other kinds of fraud, but BEC wasn't taking down pipelines. Now, of course, I do think that fraud has risen to national security concern level now, but basically like it took a while to recognize that like financial crime, cybercrime merging together, creating this asymmetric and economic warfare threat landscape that we just hadn't seen before. So then that's why I got asked to go to the National Security Council, was because there's very few people that understand cyber, transnational organized crime, and finance and cryptocurrency. Like I'm one of those few people. And so it was just one of those moments where serendipity of timing, the NSC was growing because it was a Democratic administration, ransomware was rising. And I spoke to the Deputy National Security Advisor and they asked me to come aboard, which was wonderful. So then all that meant that when I left the NSC the first time, I got asked by Commissioner Goldsmith Romero at the CFTC to chair the TAC, the Tech Advisory Committee. Because again, I had like huge experience working with international regulators, domestic regulators. I understand technology very well. So I had this incredible opportunity to work with amazing companies and experts in the field to put together two of the best reports that I've seen ever come out of regulators focused on DeFi and on AI. It was a wonderful time to get to actually shape and inject some understanding of the nuances and structural dynamics of something as novel as DeFi.
Might be a silly question because I think the obvious answer is yes. Did you enjoy that experience? Would you consider like a stepping? Would you go back to it? Is it something that been there, done that? Like I'm curious. Like what happens after you're the chair of such an important group within one of the biggest federal regulators? And
great point. The administration did ask me to go back in, so I did go back into the White House for a final stint at the end to drive the cyber EO and to do some counter threat finance stuff involving cryptocurrency. So I was again answered the call. They asked a few times, and so I finally went back in. But then now I think I'm still interested, like the same way that I loved advising that work and all those things. Like most advisory councils for agencies is like it's unpaid. It's just what you do in your free time. It's basically you volunteering your services and understanding. But a lot of companies that were on that group also decided to commit to it because we recognize that we need our government agencies and our policymakers to be experts and to understand like what are the scopes of risks, what are the scopes of the benefits, what are the costs of taking action, of not taking any action, and really getting into like the deep dive nuances of the way that tech as well as regulations work. Like there's some times where I know regulations better than some policymakers, and certainly where I can know technology better than them, and like creating that bridge between technology and operations and policy is really like where it's certainly one of my superpowers that I think many of the people on those committees tend to have that. So it's why I also served on advisory council for New York and for Idaho, and now for California. So I'm still trying to help states for federal agencies. I don't think under this administration that I'll be asked to serve on any committees just because I was in the Biden administration, but I'm glad that they are continuing engagement. They've reconstituted the Innovation Council. They're doing CEO level only which brings weight. I don't know how, I'm not sure that they'll be writing any reports for them just because, well, I'm sure that their staff will, but I am glad that they're continuing that engagement. So I hope to continue to be of service to policymakers on both sides of the Hill. I still talk of the Hill as at both sides of the aisle, across states, as well as at the federal level. Right now, dynamics in DC are a little interesting, but I think there's a lot of people that are,
which I want to dive into.
yeah, good.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think
No, yeah.
it's a good segue. You know, last time we spoke, we went into detail about what you're doing and what's going on from a political standpoint. Politics makes people feel very uncomfortable, but people really need to realize that when it comes to AML and fraud and cyber, it's really all depends on who's in the White House or who's running Congress, right? From a political standpoint. And I know you're very passionate about making sure whoever is in power and both parties are doing whatever's possible to make these financial instruments consumer friendly, right? Protecting the consumer.
Yeah.
Right. And you also believe in like the underlying instruments themselves. I don't know if you remember the conversation that we had 2 weeks ago, but I do want to continue it. What are you up to like these days to make sure that crypto doesn't go sideways or is not taken advantage of and it doesn't become too much of a political tool or cause for conflict? You were talking about that a couple weeks ago.
It's a tough one because I don't like any wide scale vilification of an entire technology class. Like the failures tend to be in us not thinking creatively and early enough on how to design in some of the protections and measures that need to be created. I was very frustrated with AI when Elon Musk and so many people that I respect and care for in the tech community and in academia wrote that letter saying after ChatGPT launched that, oh, everybody should just pause on AI development. And while I do I'm sure that there are people that had some personal agenda around regulatory capture or something that, but for the most part, I do believe that it was driven from a point of good intentions. My problem is that pausing is not a realistic understanding of the way that economies work, of the way that life is. What would have meant something really, really importantly could have been the wealthiest men in the world and thousands of academics and researchers and CEOs saying, let's do a 6-month sprint of investment into the trust tech foundation and building blocks that will allow us to enable things like transparency and understanding and identity and security across these ecosystems. That kind of gives the North Star to what I'm trying to do. First, I'm continuing to engage with policymakers. Again, on both sides, I will always offer my views to anyone that's interested. So whether it's responding to NPRM's notices of proposed rulemaking that are coming out, engaging with leadership inside of the U.S. government, or also talking to folks on the Hill, there's good bipartisan legislation coming out on some areas around like counter fraud and identity that I really like. Engaging certainly on some of the cryptocurrency legislation and where some of my greatest concerns are for what we've been driven there. So I think my greatest sadness right now for the sector is that because it went so hard politically to one side and the way that they went so hard. And I know that this is a concern. I hear this from many people like C-suite level executives across the industry recognizing this problem where now they've bound themselves very much to one side in particular. And especially when it looks like that Congress is going to flip potentially in whole this fall, it's not looking great. And that the message and perception of the industry has been one that has leaned too far into political protection over public trust. And that is a huge concern for me. So I'm continuing to try to garner interest with those in the cryptocurrency sector that want to pursue initiatives on pilots and research and development and engagement that can help us to build out what that trust tech architecture and infrastructure looks like and move past the talking points that policymakers recognize. Like they're not, like policymakers aren't stupid. Like a lot of them, their spidey senses go off when they're being told, oh, everything's great and zero knowledge proofs will fix everything. But they're like, no, like, wait, this thing that we already are having a really hard time recovering, assets that are stolen and funding half of North Korea's proliferation program or hurting grandma at a crypto ATM. Like, you're just going to introduce more privacy to that to make it even harder for us to recover? What do you mean? Even though, like, I also recognize, golly, people do not want to publish their financial information on a public, unobscured record. Like, I do believe that privacy is the future of this space, but it's why, like, industry hasn't been pushed to go to the next step of, like, what is that governance architecture to really build in and program in, not just leaning on the public traceability as a feature that allows for risk mitigation, but leaning in on the programmability and extensibility features of crypto that can allow for built-in and programmable compliance and security, because we don't actually I don't think that censorship resistance above all is actually a desirable feature for most in a financial system. There are many in DeFi who feel very differently, by the way. I fully recognize that we have different worldviews, but people make mistakes. People get hurt and defrauded. We want ways to try to be able to recover those assets. So I'm trying to help support think tanks and universities and companies that are trying to convene issues around that. Anybody who wants to develop solutions, that wants to get that balance between privacy and security right, and then continuing to engage with policymakers. So it's kind of a mix, like multi-vector angles of attack, basically, is what I'm continuing.
So your whole strategy of bringing it back, as opposed to being one-sided, is getting the word out there and putting it out there for people to know more than anything else.
Yeah, and helping companies. I'm on some boards. I'm on the board of a nonprofit that is focused on messaging and communications. Open Frontier. It's focused on progressive technology vision in innovation, like in AI, in DeFi, and economic agendas. Also, advising policymakers with companies, trying to help them think about how to build in some of the different technical capabilities and governance architectures into their products and solutions. So it's a mix of me helping companies directly, whether I'm on their advisory board or doing consulting work for them, helping big institutions figure out how to safely engage in the space, but then also doing the think tank kind of thought leadership work, like you said, to try to help enable the convening and get common understanding. I'm on the G20 Digital Asset Task Force, for example, trying to help, drive what the right policy objectives are for all of the G20 nations and policymakers and central bankers on what policy should be around digital assets. But some of that means pushing the crypto community, because it's not G1, it's G20. And there's a lot of countries in G20 that are getting increasingly skeptical of crypto, and crypto needs to come to the table to show a meaningful investment in that trust tech architecture, I think.
What are your thoughts on more recent legislation around crypto, like Genius and Clarity? Do you like them from a fundamental perspective? Do you have any thoughts about whether Clarity is going to pass the way considering stablecoin yields?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head on a really pointed topic. I will say, so I testified on the weaknesses in both of those pieces of legislation last year. With Genius, in the end, I probably view Genius as more good than bad. There are many huge gaps and issues with Genius, big problems with Genius, including that I can't believe that we've forsaken direct regulatory oversight over the largest US dollar denominated peer-to-peer transfer system in the world. We've decided, and unfortunately, that is now providing active US dollar liquidity to some extremely concerning actors and projects. So anyway, I have concerns around that. And there's a lot of things that are missing around like bankruptcy and consumer protection and security that just it's not comprehensive. And frankly, all of the stuff in Genius should have been pursued as a payments charter. I cannot believe that we've regulated payment stablecoins before we regulated payments in this country. It drives me wild, but I've been pushing for a payments charter since 2018, and that has not gone anywhere. So be it. On market structure, I really cannot stand most of this legislation. It's 400 pages and it should be 40. It just makes me sad because there was a lot of work done, bipartisan work done. The McHenry Waters work was years of effort. And I gave great credit to people on both sides. I was sad that they scrapped it. And because they decided to scrap it and start from scratch, it ended up being rushed. And I think you end up with a really tortuously drafted, a lot of things that just don't make sense. I view the current legislation as more harm than good, which makes me sad because I want there to be legislation. I do. I wanted and advocated for stablecoin legislation for a very long time. So I want there to be frameworks. I think that because of the way that they chose to go about this framework, it's part of why you still have these tense issues around stuff like ethics and yield and so many other things and AML that still haven't been resolved. I'd give market structure a 30% chance of passing this year. That's my feeling.
I was going to be nice. 30%. Wow. Okay.
Do you think that from a legislation perspective, there are certain, and I'm not just talking about these two, but there are certain times people just need to get something out so that it can literally be fixed?
Yeah. Yes.
Sometimes you know what you're putting out is not the greatest product.
No, yeah, I think you're totally right, Zach. I feel that way mostly about Genius. There's a couple of fatal flaws that I'm really sad about, but I kind of feel that way about Genius. I really don't about market structure, because I'll tell you, I think that basically, other than giving the CFTC non-security spots markets authorities, you don't need legislation for any of it. The SEC and CFTC could actually issue rulemakings right now to solve this problem. And again, spent years encouraging them to do so. There was a whole context behind. Anyway, my sadness is, and what we didn't get done for many years running, including when I was just a civil servant and not an appointee, they didn't do it, and I hope that the SEC and CFTC will. They should. There should be a clear pathway into registration. That does not require legislation. Most of this legislation is not needed. It's just industry wants it because then it'll be harder to change, and there's a lot of dynamics behind why they want it to be codified in statute. I actually don't think that you need legislation for most of the market structure issues. Most of the market structure the SEC and CFTC can fix right now.
Then the real question is, why aren't they doing it sooner?
Yeah. Honestly, the political will issue was the problem with the last administration, the problems that we had. Because trust me, we provided technical drafting assistance for years and years and years, but we didn't go sit on Congress's desk and say, this is the priority, go make it happen the way that this administration has. And that is and they've done that well. Making it a priority makes things move. It just does. And not being able to get that because of a lack of, in my view, not understanding the importance of putting in place those regulatory frameworks because of the tensions that exist. And you see this on both sides of the aisle, because there's tension inside of the Republicans, especially on the Senate side, around cryptocurrency legislation and AML protections. On the Democrat side, you certainly see a schism on this, related to AI as well as to crypto. This problem of some people who feel that putting in place a regulation is what legitimizes the space. And as a regulator who's actually enforced anything, I'm actually, no, regulating it is what gives me legitimate authorities to go after the most egregious violators. That is what was needed. It was desperately needed. It could have been done. We respected the independence of the independent regulators, and decisions that were made around that. It was a misstep. We really, really needed to get those frameworks put in place. We didn't, and we lost big because of it. Genius could have looked way better if we had used the stablecoin framework that we had been negotiating for 6 years before that. We did this and we cost it to ourselves. So I do understand why people want to move on something, because God, they don't want to wait 2 more years for more legislation. It's why I want the SEC and CFTC to issue joint rulemaking tomorrow. I think we could do the market structure stuff mostly on our own. But I, said like a regulator, I always preferred I liked Chevron deference because I thought we could do a lot more faster and more agilely on the regulatory side, because it takes forever for Congress to move. And it's hard to call regulators agile. I understand, but in relation to Congress, there's a relative skew there. So I understand people wanting to push it. There are some real problems with the current market structure legislation, and because they decided to start over, it's why it's taking so long for them to try to figure out how to fix it, because it takes a long time for them to get good policy. And I think it could have been there's ways to try to fix it, but it's just really, really hard. And I just don't see how they're going to address some of those core tensions. The ethics issue is also going to be a really tough one, and that one's very political.
It was interesting the way you just reframed legislation as not a way to make it mainstream, but a way to enforce. I guess as a consumer, as a civilian here, I thought legislation would actually meant normalization, mainstream.
Yeah, I think it's both. It's both, enforcing against the biggest fraudsters and people that are undermining the credibility and stability of the space. US American-based companies are often the best actors in the crypto space. Us refusing to enforce against the most egregious violators did not create a competitive landscape for the best actors in the crypto space. This was part of my frustration. Enforcement actions would take 5 to 10 years. The quickest actions that we brought were all against the American companies. So we had a lot of the foreign operators were acting unimpeded at way lower costs and consequences to the American ones. It's why the Gary Gensler approach of why the sadness around the tone deafness of if you bring enforcement and it's all citing failures to register, which the SEC has the authority to take action against. If the actions had instead been against and citing massive market manipulation and fraud, you would have had a totally different response from the industry to those enforcement actions, right? If the actions had been prioritized and scaled against those bad actors, and not the ones that are the easiest to wrap our arms around that are in the US, because they are the easiest to wrap our arms around. Like, this is the problem of where like independent regulators' decisions around policy on pathway into registration, prioritization of how we do enforcement. My own view that enforcement should be early and often, because enforcement shouldn't be sector breaking. It should be sector shaping. It should be small, little penalties. If it's an historically large penalty, that means we allowed it to become an historically large problem. That is not, in fact, a good news story. Like that is, we should be self-reflecting on how we allowed this to get that far. So to me, it is about maturing the space in a good way. Regulation's supposed to help the sector, which is supposed to help consumers. I do think that a mismatch on choices around policy and enforcement is what kind of led us to now the state of the crypto industry. It's not inevitable. We can fix it, but like we've lost a lot of headway and we took too long to do a lot of things.
So I'm curious now, like, where do you see crypto as an investment tool? Where do you see it in 5 to 10 years? Is it still going to be around? Is it going to be in a different form? Is AI and quantum computing just going to destroy it? Like, from a policy perspective, are we going to succeed? Are we going to fix it? What does your gut say?
Oh, quantum. You did say the magic word on quantum. I am really worried about the quantum problem. I'm sure you guys are too. Like, decentralized communities have a hard time organizing. We have seen that where the sector has not organized around cybersecurity standards. It's why North Korea and other illicit actors continue to like target this sector. Even when they're compromising them, they're exploiting a lot of common vulnerabilities that are known in the industry. And basically like this issue around security not being prioritized at first. And there hasn't been a meaningful focus across the sector on security in a good enough way. I'm glad that NIST is finally hosting their first ever workshop on blockchain security standards tomorrow, which I'll be speaking at. But I've been fighting for that for many years. Like, I am very excited that it's happening. But the industry also hasn't really been organizing. There've been a few efforts like the Blockchain Governance Initiative, C4 and CCSS, but like there's not many, like there really hasn't been a lot of traction gained around security and recovery of assets because some people feel that it's against the ethos of crypto. And quantum is going to test that because especially Bitcoin, I am very curious to see how the sector organizes around that because quantum is pointed at exactly undermining the kind of cryptography that cryptocurrency is reliant upon. There's a lot that has to get done there, but I am excited about some of the efforts that I've seen from some very, very smart people who have at least been trying to map out what the steps are. So we'll see if the sector takes those actions. A lot of decisions will have to get made about who eats the costs the more. Like, will it be consumers? Will it be like node operators? Like, there's some interesting questions there. I think the tokenization of real world assets and securities is going to be the next 5 to 10 years, like TradFi, now that finally the cuffs have been taken off of traditional institutions because like, and they should be allowed to experiment with this, right? Like they understand operational risk, counterparty risk really well. Like I don't know who will win, but I want the people that understand operational risk and cybersecurity to be able to come and like compete with DeFi. So now that they can, I think that's going to be where like the institutional innovation is going to be the next 5 years push, especially. So that's where I think a lot of the investment stuff is not going to be like a new cryptocurrency, like, you know, like a new coin specifically as the investment. It's tokenization and settlement infrastructure for already existing like legal like instruments and an infrastructure for investment vehicles. So that's what I think that is it's going to look like. The AI and decentralized infrastructure thing is a very real question that I have. They reinforce each other's best and worst traits in fascinating ways. AI and blockchain. AI helps solve scalability problems and compliance problems for crypto. Crypto and blockchain can help address some of the black box and auditability, data integrity issues for AI. But when you have the scalability of AI reinforcing the absence of willingness to accept accountability that you get in parts of the crypto industry, like I was on stage in Japan, this was a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, I pulled up ChatGPT and was like, hey, if I deployed you on a decentralized network and you started to act erroneously, maliciously, whatever, could I stop you? And ChatGPT's answer on stage was, it depends on how good my security is, how decentralized I am, and how good your authorities are. And I was like, that is a great answer, ChatGPT. Yeah.
It was very diplomatic. It was like, yeah, maybe, probably not.
Yeah, probably not, right? Like, yeah.
I was going to say, being with all this institutional innovation, obviously with innovation comes people who are going to test the waters, bad actors. Do you imagine with TradFi jumping into the space, I'm not jumping in, but just more people involved in the space, there'll be significantly more intricate fraud scandals.
So I think we're already seeing it, right? Bad actors already recognize that crypto is a really great, useful tool for them. There's Iran using crypto for purchasing drone components, and now for extracting tolls through the Strait of Hormuz. Cyber criminals, fraudsters, whatever. Like it's what I'm hoping is that with traditional finance, which means a lot of entities that generally are regulated inside of their different jurisdictions because they are big companies that people recognize, and like governments know how to go wrap their arms around something that is typically incorporated as a legal person, and doesn't try to say that they're not a person. Basically, like I think that the opportunities for intervention and interdiction potentially increase, but I do think that with much more like liquidity and interest that gets potentially flooded into here, because I think that stablecoins, like people that weren't traditionally interested in blockchain, like Web 2 and AI guys, like in my experience, like Web 2 does not care about Web 3 at all. Like even the DEF CON guys, like I just like when I'm at these conferences, like they're only talking about crypto if they're complaining about pig butchering or ransomware, right? Like no one's talking about Web3 infrastructure at most of the like internet conferences. But AI guys have started to be interested because in the age of agentic commerce, when these people started to play with AI agents and then they realized, oh wait, an ACH transfer takes 3 to 5 days to settle. That sucks. And then recognizing that like stablecoins are the like currently the only widely accessible innovation that has made widely accessible digital forms of a dollar that can support things like 24/7 operations and instant settlement. I'll put an asterisk after dollar because of my feelings about some of the things in Genius, but like and depending on which stablecoins we're talking about, but like basically like imagining that they actually are stable and are compliant and whatever. Like there's going to be a huge amount of interest right now in stablecoins because of agentic commerce. But then I do think that traditional finance, like I'm very curious to see what the payments companies, what the credit card companies, what tokenized deposits end up coming. Like there's going to be more competition coming into this space. You're right on fraudsters, like as more stuff, if they end up relying upon open and permissionless systems, if we don't build in those protections, the opportunity to just have even more liquidity and interconnected networks that are now being exploited by bad actors does exist. But I also know that since there'll be some intermediaries that regulators feel much more comfortable about going, hey, you, what's up? Like with that fraud going through there, I'm at least like, so it may end up being kind of a wash. I'm curious. And I do think that there's a big focus on fighting fraud right now in industry and in the government. So there may be some good opportunities to stop it. But I'm actually much more concerned that I don't know if anybody has a real understanding of the impacts on stability and leverage that you get with instant settlement, 24/7 trading, and bearer instruments that you get with tokenization and agentic commerce mixed together. If anyone listening is an economist or somebody that has the answers to that, please let me know. I think that there's a lot of things that still need to be dug into and understood. So I'm more concerned about people really understanding some of the stability and market dynamics and shapes that end up coming with this. On the fraud stuff with more TradFi, I'm hopeful that more investments will come that will actually make it harder for bad actors to use crypto. We should be able to dare criminals to use crypto. We've just not evolved the space yet to there, but we could get there. We could do it together if the industry will have to organize around this. But we need some investment.
Call to action here.
Yeah,
That's the
exactly.
call to action. Let's do it together. Let's do it. So this might be, I don't think this is a hard segue, but I do want to get into much more of a career guidance conversation to end this episode. So you have a ton of experience in fraud prevention, cybersecurity, policy, your passion for the crypto space, and your understanding of the nuances that most of us don't understand within Genius and Clarity. My level of understanding is a lot more superficial. I can speak about it, but I come to people like you to get the nitty gritty. But with all your experience working in the government, your experience with crypto, and of course the policies, and of course understanding how sophisticated fraud is getting, Zach and I are recruiters in this space, and most of the people that follow us want to get career guidance from people like you, not just how you got that passion you have, but also can you summarizing it or giving some advice on where? Let me sum it up this way: what areas do you think are going to be hiring the most in the regulatory space? What are your thoughts on fintechs and their hiring spree recently? Actually, let's start with that first question. Where do you see hiring the most and in the private sector when it comes to AML, financial crimes, and fraud, whether it's in crypto or TradFi?
Yeah, I think fraud is getting a huge amount of attention right now in an important way. It should have been prioritized way sooner. It was just so often seen as a cost of doing business. But I do think that becoming familiar with and understanding, and then what is fraud to your institution? It looks different if you're on a social media platform versus if you're at a payments provider versus if you're at like crypto or a bank. But I do think that understanding fraud and really like, for me, skill sets that understand tech and are not afraid of it, but then also understand, like, bring in some of that exquisite expertise on things like policy, on things like the way that illicit actors operate, on data, especially if you're in like a compliance role, like needing to understand what data is accessible and those kinds of things, like being able to understand what are the best in class technical controls that you can put in place, but then also what information is available to you to then leverage in really innovative ways. This is where fintechs like often will end up having like parts of their AML programs that will often look better than like giant banks and tier one banks will be use of emerging technologies and interesting data. Some of their weaknesses can tend to be around like KYC and other things, but like they're like a lot of their strengths rely in the fact that they are kind of tech savvy and they sit at that nexus between tech and finance, which you two definitely do. And I know many of the executives that you work with do. So I think like making sure that you feel good on that and continuing to make sure that you're building out your understanding on that fin side, on that tech side, and then if policy or if typology, like you might be good at both of those, but if you're in like intelligence and investigations, you might care more about typologies and threat picture and like the way that deep fakes are specifically being used to circumvent KYC controls. You might care about that more versus somebody saying like, keep an eye on what's happening on the Hill. Like look at the legislation that's coming out in bipartisan ways, opportunities for engaging and growing your footprint, your voice. Like there's, I think, looking for where those opportunities exist by keeping that scene setting and that landscape gazing and scanning, making that part of your TTPs. I think that that's some advice that I would point to. So I do think fraud has been big. AML, I will say that generally last year there was a huge hemorrhage that I saw. People not caring about compliance. They were like really reducing compliance and growing government affairs and lobbying. They were reading the room on the way that they were going to be interacting with regulators and the Hill. But now I'm seeing more beefing up on the compliance side because regulations are actually getting put into place under things like Genius. So especially for stablecoins and other areas, like I think that looking where big institutions that want to play in stablecoins because of things like agentic commerce and otherwise, and helping like now that the cuffs have been taken off, thinking about like, do you want to go to TradFi and help them kind of bridge into crypto, fintech disruption, and think about risks in a more holistic way? Or do you want to go into a fintech that's trying to compete? There's a lot of competition right now. So I know a lot of people that I've seen have actually been going from fintechs and into big banks and institutions that are trying to figure out how to play.
You're seeing a movement away from fintechs to TradFi instead of the opposite.
I have seen some big moves on that. Yes, like I think like fintech's still there. Just like now that TradFi has had the cuffs taken off, like they're recognizing like, okay. Now they're slow, like they're not as bureaucratic as the government, but like they are more bureaucratic than startups, certainly. So they're slow, but I have seen some of the best people that I know have been either bridging out and doing consulting work, helping with big institutions, or they've been going in-house on the compliance and financial crime side to like big banks or even like hedge funds and brokers and stuff, trying to help them figure out how to deal with tokenization and crypto.
I have one last question. I'll let Zach ask his last question before we end this segment. But this question is kind of tied to the first one. AI is having a huge impact. Headline news. Recently, Bolt letting go of 33% of its staff. Block letting go of 40% of its staff. And who knows who's coming next, right? It seems like AI seems to be the go-to for the reason for mass layoffs. But there's no doubt it's also we see from a recruiting standpoint, AI is going to be taking a lot of the more entry level positions, which require a lot of basic responsibilities. So to put you on the spot, if you were graduating, knowing what you know, but you were graduating today, how would you bulletproof yourself in this era of AI?
I feel really strongly about this. I've got nieces and nephew that are that age group right now and trying to figure out that answer. And I'm trying to help states figure out what the right kind of policies are to put into place to try to help address this issue. Because I don't think that we're seeing a lot of focus, since we've seen dismantling a lot of focus on education and other stuff at the federal level. I think that states are a really good ground right now to focus on what the like workforce readiness and like flywheel kind of ecosystem is that we could create. But if I were one of those students, I would not want to be a computer science major. I might be, if it was a double major or a minor or whatever, like I would want to know tech. I would want to know tech. But I would not want to just be the software dev guy. Like I'd instead want to I'd want to have a very exquisite, specific focus where I am the expert, where I am the person that like brings in a really deep understanding of something that AI is not great at leveraging judgment for. So basically like being that expert on whatever it is that interests you, but especially on skills that we know that they're not great at. So like engineering and other stuff. So not just like software engineering, but like other kinds of engineering. I would want to do something like that, even if it is international relations or if it's finance or anything else that you want to study. Like I would very much consider either getting certificates and training programs or taking all the free courses that are coming out. Like be the tech savvy expert in something else. Like that's what I would advise. Is not like right now it's really tough in cyber. Like I need cybersecurity experts. I do, but like right now it's like we've not built the apparatus to really be able to bring folks in. So even if it's not fair to say like don't give up on tech, I'm saying like at least pair it with being the expert in something.
Yeah. You're saying be a tech expert, but not just that.
Not just that. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be limiting. That would actually limit you.
Yeah.
10 years ago, that would have been heresy. What you said just now, like it's interesting how things change, right? Everyone should be a tech expert, but don't just be a software engineer, right? Mm-hmm. Like don't be a Java developer. That would be the wrong way to go.
I think I've said this at the end of almost every episode because I do believe it's true. The only thing I would add to your point, Carole, is yes, make yourself irreplaceable, but I think the most important step other than that is to network yourself.
Yeah, great point.
Literally everything in life is about who you know and timing. And in this age where people are trying to get jobs in this market, you have to be able to put yourself out there and network more than anything else. Having an irreplaceable skill is important, but if you don't know how to work well with others or even how to talk to other people, it needs to be one of your first observations and first tools that you get. Going into
how are people going to know what skills you have, right? Unless you
correct. So I don't have an ending question because you kind of answered my ending question. But if I was to add anything to what you said, I would add make yourself irreplaceable from a skill set perspective and endless amounts of networking. It is the most important part, I believe.
Carole, thank you so much for being on. That was super interesting.
I'm glad that you guys help shepherd people through this. It's wonderful and helpful and necessary, and things are going to look really different. So I love that call to action from Zach about like putting yourself out there. Like think about your voice and how you want to get it just in a room or just even blast it out publicly. Like there's a lot of expert people with great insights in your community, and hopefully they're listening to this. And so I think about that. I think about that myself too. Like that is a big part of like me trying to figure out like how do I help course correct policymakers on emerging tech policy, since I think neither side, like we've not quite gotten it right yet. Like we can do guardrails and a road that actually goes somewhere. Like we can do both. Like I feel like one side does one thing and one side does the other, and like let's like in the middle ground. And there are lots of people that I think are working towards that common vision too. So thank you guys so much for the opportunity to chat with you, with all of your listeners. This was great.
Thank you, Carole. We'll see you next week in Hollywood.